Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today, we are diving into a pretty wild, interconnected web of global events that unfolded in May 2026. We're going to trace a really powerful, overarching theme today, and that is the idea of nations choosing to do as suits the best. Basically, what happens when countries across the board just start strictly prioritizing their own strategic self-interest? Well, as you're going to see, it creates this massive macro to micro ripple effect. We're talking a domino effect that starts with high-level military repositioning, cascades down into international trade, and ultimately literally hits our very own wallets. So let's unpack exactly how that happens, step by step. Okay, let's just dive right into the roadmap for today's explainer. First up, we've got global military realignment. Then we'll look at the transatlantic trade war igniting. Third, we'll track the domestic economic fallout. And finally, we'll look at the forgotten humanitarian crises that get left in the wake. Section 1. Global military realignment. So we're looking at this kind of split reality in the Middle East right now. First, the 60-day limit of the War Powers Resolution expires, and President Trump formally notifies Congress that active military operations against Iran are officially terminated. But while the administration is framing this as a massive, successful de-escalation, there's another side to the coin. A heavy U.S. naval presence remains firmly stationed right there in the Strait of Hormuz to manage global shipping lanes. It's actually a textbook example of doing as suits the best, right? You comply with the domestic legal deadline on one hand, while absolutely keeping a huge strategic deterrent hovering over vital global trade routes on the other. And that brings us to this incredibly significant number, 5,000. That is the exact number of U.S. troops the Pentagon is currently withdrawing from Germany. Now, keep in mind that's a massive shift considering the permanent U.S. footprint that's been there since the Cold War. This isn't just some routine administrative shuffle. It is happening right in the middle of deepening diplomatic standoffs over defense spending and calls for European autonomy. And, well, this brilliantly illustrates the friction building up inside NATO. It's essentially a tug of war. From Brussels' perspective, pulling 5,000 troops out creates a highly concerning security vacuum in Europe, one they genuinely fear is going to embolden regional adversaries. But flip over to Washington's perspective, and the White House is entirely focused on a strategic realignment, pivoting those exact forces toward the Indo-Pacific. Neither side is budging. Both are acting strictly on what they perceive as their absolute top strategic priority. So the whole alliance is just being fundamentally stress-tested by this. Moving on to Section 2, Transatlantic Trade War ignites. Okay, so the economic hostility here has basically hit a boiling point. The U.S. moves forward with a staggering 25% tariff on European automotive imports, completely aimed at protecting domestic manufacturing. And the immediate reaction from the EU? Pure retaliation. They fired back with their own tariffs specifically targeting U.S. agricultural goods. It's totally tit for tat. We are witnessing a massive shift away from what we traditionally call the special relationship, simply because playing hardball with economic protectionism is what currently suits each side best. Which brings us to Section 3, domestic economic fallout. Let's bring this closer to home, because this global geopolitical friction actually hits the domestic economy incredibly hard. Case in point, the aviation sector. Spirit Airlines, a major domestic player, has completely halted all operations. A White House rescue package totally collapsed, leaving the airline to just get crushed by sustained high fuel costs. And remember those global shipping lane tensions we just talked about in the Strait of Hormuz? Yeah, that plays a massive role in keeping those fuel costs high. Add to that a broader nationwide gas price backlash affecting the wider economy, and you've got a perfect storm. It's literally global energy instability directly bankrupting a major domestic company. Now, why does this matter directly to you and me? Well, the immediate fallout is thousands of passengers stranded at airports right at this very moment. But the long-term ripple effect? Industry analysts are projecting a significant spike in domestic travel costs. Think about it. When major players collapse because of fuel costs and a lack of federal bailouts, the competition shrinks. And what happens when competition shrinks? The remaining airlines hike their prices. So your next summer vacation or business trip is absolutely about to get more expensive, which directly links your personal wallet to these high-level global trade and fuel standoffs. Let's zoom back out to the global stage for Section 4, forgotten humanitarian crises. The numbers coming out of South Sudan right now are just stark. Exactly half of the entire population, 50%, is currently facing acute food insecurity and a catastrophic famine. Let that sink in. Half of an entire nation is struggling right now simply to find enough food to survive the day. So you might be wondering, why isn't the international community rushing in to help? Well, humanitarian leaders are pointing to what they call global diplomatic fatigue. the global community is severely struggling to mobilize life-saving resources because their bandwidth is just completely fractured. They are entirely consumed by US-China tech certification wars. They are bogged down managing those Middle Eastern naval tensions, and they are hyper-focused on the domestic protectionism that's causing trade wars in Europe. Basically, everyone is so incredibly busy doing as suits the best for their own economies and militaries that there's literally no diplomatic energy left for East Africa.
The United Nations has actually issued a super stark warning regarding this growing crisis, stating simply, despair is a form of surrender. It is such a haunting contrast, isn't it? Wealthy nations fighting tooth and nail over 25% auto tariffs, while the raw, neglected reality of profound human suffering just gets completely left in the dark.
And that really brings us to our final question for today. What actually happens to global stability when economic protectionism and strategic self-interest constantly take priority over international cooperation? From pulling 5,000 troops out of Germany, to fighting a tit-for-tat war over car and agriculture tariffs, to domestic airlines totally collapsing, and finally to half a nation facing famine while the world basically looks away, we are seeing the ultimate interconnected cost of a world where every nation simply chooses to do as suits the best. Thank you so much for joining me to unpack this super complex explainer today. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next one.